Hello and welcome to the Leonid Live Lounge. This week, I'm joined by Solene Guegan-Richet. Her career spans more than 20 years, working predominantly as in-house counsel for companies in a wide range of industries, including manufacturing, automotive, regulated FMCG, and retail. She is currently lead counsel for digital, AI, and privacy for the EMEA region, working in the beauty industry. Hi, Solene. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
Hi, Phil. Thank you for having me in this podcast. And thank you for this introduction as well. I'm doing well, and I look forward to sharing my experience and my knowledge in the area of artificial intelligence and privacy law.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. It's said to you before the podcast, didn't I? This is it's a really interesting growth area. It's something that we get asked about all the time. And yeah, I'm really excited to get into this with you. Today, our intention, if we get to it, is to cover career pathways for lawyers wanting to get into this space. And if we have a little bit of time, to talk about some of the developments in the regulation of AI and what that landscape looks like. And obviously very keen to get your thoughts on this. So I suppose let's dive straight in. One thing I was really keen to ask you is what initially sparked your interest in working in the AI and privacy space and working in this kind of role?
Well, I suppose, like most lawyers that are interested in tech law, intellectual property law, and privacy law as well, I got very intrigued about the impact AI, especially artificial intelligence, would have not only in my daily life, but also in the way I work and in the way I negotiate agreement with AI vendors. So I would say my academic background led me to get this curiosity about these areas of law. But in addition to that, I must say that when I joined the tech industry, when I was working in London in the company called Arrival, it was a tech automotive industry. I really dived into the world of AI and privacy law further. And at the time, I remember I was not so well versed in privacy law, but it was the time where there was the UK GDPR being implemented. In the background, you had the Schrems decisions. So the regulatory landscape and the developments on the privacy law front were very dense. And so I really want to know more. And I was working, in this industry, Arrival manufactures connected vehicles. So from a privacy law perspective, we really had to address how to deal with the data generated by the vehicles, not only the technical data, but also data that could be seen to some extent as personal data, and therefore subject to
Yeah.
privacy law. And I'm talking about geolocation data, these kind of things. And on the AI front, when I was working in this company, I was working in the negotiation of the procurement of the equipment for the production sites. And Arrival has what they call microfactories. And by the way, what I'm about to say is public knowledge, so I just want to clarify. But
Yeah.
they have these microfactories that are designed to produce these connected vehicles and that are electric vehicles. And for that, they need clusters of robotic arms that are completely driven by computer vision. And this is combined with some sort of AI-based controls. And so when I was working on this agreement, I really had to, bring myself up to speed with what I should be taking care of, what I should understand from an intellectual property law perspective as well to better secure the interests of the organization I was working for. So I
Yeah.
would say overall, it was a combination of my academic background and the opportunity I got to evolve in the tech industry that really gave me this appetite, I would say, to know more about AI and privacy law.
Yeah, no, really interesting. And actually, you're right. The kind of intersection between IP, privacy, and AI. It's well, this is the point, right? This is a very fast developing technology, and therefore it has to be a very fast developing area of law and regulation, which often is playing catch up. So quite a fun space to be in, I can imagine. I wanted to ask as well. Obviously being in a role like this, and we've talked about there's a lot of moving parts to it. Could you describe, or did you have some kind of key experiences during your career that you feel have really prepared you to take on a role like this?
Well, I must say, when I even before I took a role like that, I realized that nowadays lawyers that work on tech law matters, especially, they have to be very adaptable and really think outside the box. And it's easy and tempting, when you want to apply for a role in the AI world or on privacy law, and especially in the AI world, I would say, to think, well, at the end of the day, AI, it's all about, like, it's a computer software which is programmed to execute algorithms that are sets of code giving instructions to perform specific tasks. And if you are a tech lawyer with no particular knowledge on the AI area, you may think, well, I will just do what I've done so far, like negotiating SaaS agreements, software license agreements. But that would be a mistake, I would say, to reason this way. So for those lawyers that are well versed in these software agreements but do not have a better knowledge of what it entails to work in the AI world, be very cautious. And that's what I have experienced myself, and it's still a learning curve for me, of course. But I would say as well that on the IP area, intellectual property area, being an intellectual property law lawyer, you so far in my previous experiences before joining the tech industry, I mean, I was really trying, as any IP lawyer would do, I was trying to secure, the ownership of any developments brought to a new solution. So that was like the biggest fight, I would say, when you had a negotiation, the best battle to fight, I would say. But if you transpose this in a simplistic manner to the AI world, you could run and encounter like a number of risks. And to give you an example, and it's one of the key experiences that I had, if you just try to negotiate the ownership of the output data. So perhaps for those who are not so familiar with the terminology used, so when you have an AI system, it is trained based on a vast amount of data, and you can add to this like your input data if you wish. And if you ask a question to the AI system, which is called a prompt in the terminology used, you're going to get something out of the AI system, which is called output data. And so the temptation for IP lawyers may be to say, well, no matter what, I want to get the ownership of this output data and any IP rights deriving from this output data. But what you may encounter is that it could well be that this output data already incorporates third-party pre-existing IP rights that you will
Yes.
therefore infringe should you claim, the ownership of these IP rights. So it's just to say that that's also going to dictate the way you're going to maneuver with an AI vendor when you negotiate an agreement, because to address this specific point, for example, you may think, okay, shall I check with my vendor whether they have cleared the rights of any data that have been training the AI system before? Or if it's not the case, what I have seen in my experience is key, like big players, AI vendors, offering some kind of IP indemnification. So they would tell you, well, you customer, you own the output data, but if it happens that this output data infringe third-party existing rights, we are prepared to offer you an IP indemnification. But Phil, as you can
Right.
imagine, these IP indemnification clauses include so many carve-out provisions that you
Yeah.
really have to constantly have this fresh pair of eyes to negotiate, and make sure that you do not end up with an IP indemnification, which at the end of the day becomes useless, for your company. So it's one experience. Another thing as well. I just lost you for 1 minute. Sorry. So you're back on screen.
I'm here. Don't worry. I'm here, and I can hear you crystal clear. So please, no, please carry on.
Okay, that's great. To share also my experience, another thing that I have seen working on consumer-facing solutions, including AI and solutions for internal use, is that you really have to understand and pay extra attention to the form of AI which is going to get from a vendor, and it's not always crystal clear. So it's important to assess, and if needs be, with the help of a data scientist that can be working in your organization, whether it deals with predictive AI or generative AI, because that's also going to dictate the way you're going to negotiate these agreements. So yes, and what I have seen as well, and that you may not know, you would certainly not know about that if you haven't started working in this area of law, is that some AI vendors, they tend to offer their solutions more like AI as a service solution, which is combined with their cloud services. And if you like, their approach is to say, well, if you do not want your input data to be used or seen by other customers of ours, we can create some kind of dedicated environment for you, for your company. And what they do, they create a kind of, they replicate a kind of mirrored version of their foundation models, so that you can have this bubble for you where you're going to use your input data. So that could be sensitive data coming from your company, but that's not a problem, because any output data will remain constrained in this safe environment.
Yeah.
So if you are in this use case, you are going to negotiate your agreement a certain way. But if you end up in another use case where an AI vendor may tell you, well, actually, I'm prepared to enable you to have access to my original foundation model, then that brings the debate to another level, because what's going to happen with the input data
Right.
in terms of security and so on. So all
Yeah.
these things, I would say, no knowledge, or if you haven't read articles or joined webinars on the subject of the topic of AI, you may miss these things. And it's important to be aware of these subtleties that are very important when you negotiate AI agreements.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I suppose what strikes me, surprise, surprise, it's a very complex area of law, and
It is,
it's
yes.
catching up and it's developing, and I suppose to an extent, companies that have the privilege of in-house counsel who are specializing in this area can navigate these sorts of things, but there will be companies that want to utilize, because the technology is there, right, and everyone's using it already. So there's companies using
Exactly.
this that aren't necessarily thinking about or understanding the implications of having data that then goes out more widely, and what they're doing with it, and that's ignoring even the IP side of actually wanting to have ownership. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the point here is, I think through your career, some of these experiences you've had and some of these companies you've worked for, and then actually just intellectually wanting to delve into these areas, that's what's kind of prepared you to then take on something like this and look at it in a broader sense. And I hope I'm right in saying probably it still feels like you're learning every day with it, and
Oh,
I
yes,
guess it never
absolutely.
stops.
And it's quite fascinating because it keeps evolving, and that triggers new questions as well. So for a lawyer, it's like really fascinating. You do not have any like routine where you get bored. No, that never happens in this area of law.
Yeah. I can imagine that there are and maybe there's some areas that have been fairly set for a couple of 100 years where people can sit quite comfortably and everyone knows what's going on, but for the majority, especially in a space like this, it's constant developments, which actually leads us very nicely onto the second thing I was keen for us to talk about, which is developments in the regulatory landscape when it comes to AI. So I suppose we're obviously now, I say finally, to an extent, they've been quick on the uptake, but we're sort of finally starting to see a real drive in regulations surrounding AI specifically, such as the EU AI Act, and whatever the American equivalent is, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know that you will absolutely know. I'm interested to know, what kind of strategies do you use personally to stay up to date with such an fast evolving area of law?
That's a very good question. Well, I must say I'm reading a lot of articles. There are a lot of resources on the internet that are accessible for free. That being said, it's important to cherry pick, those resources that are reliable. Like most of the articles I would read on the topic on the regulatory front, or even like practice notes on specific aspect of AI law, are coming from law firms. So I'm using,
Yeah.
these legal databases as well, like Practical Law, LexisNexis. They have a lot of articles and practice notes and checklists that you can read. They are kept up to date as well, which is very convenient and very helpful. And I'm joining webinars as well, organized by law firms, which is quite interesting because each law firm tend to have their own approach on certain topics, and you can by approaching same topic from different angles, that helps you to regain some perspective on the way yourself you're going to approach the same topic when you work. So that's
Yeah.
really really good. And I also signed up to newsletters. One of them, especially that I'm thinking of, is the Future of Life Institute newsletter, which was
Right.
very active, yes, when the EU Act was being discussed before it was even adopted. And there are a lot of very good articles and blogs from politicians, members of the EU
Mm.
Commission, law firms as well. And so that gives you an insight on the latest developments as regards the EU AI Act, but also the opinion of different people on different subjects. So it's a very good one. And yes, so that's basically what I'm doing. On the regulatory front, I must say I'm working
Mm.
currently in an organization which is an international, with an international coverage. And so having colleagues in the US, they bring me up to speed as well with what's happening
Yeah.
under US law. So you may have seen that at state law level, there has been some initiatives, especially at the moment there is the Colorado Act that has been adopted and which is quite aligned with the EU AI Act. The difference is that the Colorado Act, as you can imagine, is more like focusing on the Colorado state as opposed to the EU AI Act, which has this geographical extraterritorial scope.
Yeah.
Yes, and in the UK, because I've been living in the UK, I used to live in the UK for 14 years, so I'm still quite keen to follow the latest developments in the UK as well. And I must say, as far as I know, I haven't seen any global regulation
Mm.
being brought forward in the UK. It's more, the approach is more like a sector-specific approach.
Yeah.
And very recently, the US, the UK, and the EU have signed this international treaty, the Council of Europe Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence. So I would say watch this space, and it's important
Mm.
to see and we gain as well in saying the approach of these different regulations or recommendations coming from different territories. And maybe one last thing I may say on this topic is that before the EU AI Act was even adopted, I remember I joined a conference organized by Baker and McKenzie, Paris,
Mm.
and they tried to map out, flurry of like guidelines, papers, bills, regulations at worldwide level. And my first reaction, and people who were in the room as well, we were feeling like really overwhelmed
Yeah.
by this dense landscape of documents. But if you really take a step back, you can really draw the line between those documents that are more like, I would say, informative documents, as opposed to more prescriptive regulations like the EU AI Act that come
Yeah.
with penalties if you do not comply with the regulation. And coming back to the UK, even though at this time, at this point in time, they do not have any global regulation addressing AI, it doesn't mean that AI vendors based in the UK are not concerned by the EU AI Act, because as you know,
Yeah.
from the moment they offer the solutions in Europe, they have to abide by the requirements coming from the EU AI Act.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually really interesting when you talk about the multi jurisdictional piece, which, and this is the same in every area, right? But for something that's newer and developing, it's sometimes helpful and really useful if you work in a multinational that there's other resources you can look at to see, well, how have they already approached it? And is this something that can inform us in terms of what we're doing over here? Obviously, the complicating factor being where you operate in multiple areas. And with this, a lot of it's borderless. So you kind of need to know what you're doing. But really interesting mixture in terms of network there, and something I think people can take a look at. And I'm going to ask you to bring your crystal ball out for a second. And I suppose, and we'd both be very rich if it turns out this is all correct. But I'm interested to know your view, I suppose, on how you see this regulatory landscape developing further in the future. You've obviously had a good understanding of where we've got to at this point, but where you think it might be going, or what things we should be looking out for.
Yes, I must say the EU really has set the tone, by coming up
Yeah.
with this EU AI Act, which is applying a risk-based approach where they categorize, the AI solutions based on their level of risk, with requirements applying mostly to providers of the AI solutions, but also to users that are called deployers in the EU AI Act. And I must say, perhaps because I'm a European lawyer, I quite like this risk-based approach. And when I compare it with the approach in other jurisdictions, which is a little bit more laid back, perhaps because they want to really give the opportunity to AI vendors to, especially to evolve in their business and develop their solutions without feeling too restrained by a regulatory framework. So I think that, as we have seen with the GDPR, a lot of jurisdictions are going to be more or less influenced by the EU AI Act. And we see it already with the Colorado Act, with other states in the US that are kind of following, this movement, or coming up with like a framework to make sure that there are no discrimination and risk associated with the use of artificial intelligence. Then, you may always get surprises, and it could be that other jurisdictions come up with an entirely different approach. I doubt it, but I think, yes, the weight that and the message it conveys internationally, especially due to its extraterritorial scope as well, induces me to believe that most likely other jurisdictions are going to get influenced by it and apply more or less the same set of requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
That's my
suppose now,
personal opinion.
no, yes, naturally, everything caveated here. I feel inexperienced in this space enough to say I have no opinion on it, but I'm very, very interested to hear yours. And, we'll see what happens, but it's certainly, we have more clarity now, right? As some of these regulations have already come through and you can see the direction of travel, but I won't be running off and hiding in a cabin in the woods just yet. I think nothing's taken over. So no, fantastic. Well, timing wise, I think we're about done. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time today. Really, really insightful. And I think this is something that hopefully for any lawyers and aspiring lawyers who are really interested in this space and want to understand what it looks like from the other side, I'm very, very grateful for you taking the time to showcase that for us a little bit. But to you and to our listeners as well, have a wonderful day. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I must say, I really like this collective community effort to share the experiences that lawyers may have in different areas of law. And I think this initiative with this podcast is a very good one. I was really happy to share my experience in these areas of law. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very grateful to hear that as well. But yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Solene. I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.